How do you find a percent of a number? Well, there are many ways to solve this type of a problem. Here we are going to talk about two different ways, one with using a calculator and one without using a calculator.
1. Change the percent to a fraction. Okay, for example, that's easy to do, remember, because any percent, like 47%, is the fraction 47 over 100. Okay, 47% means per 100. So 47 hundredths is equivalent to 47%. Or like 39% would be 39 over 100. 73% would be 73 over 100. Some percents we know in reduced form, like 10%. You probably all know that's 1/10. It's 10 over 100, but simplifies to 1/10. 75%, 3/4. 75 over 100 simplifies to 3/4. Okay, so the first thing you do is you change the percent to a fraction. The second thing you do is multiply by the fraction. Okay, so for example, let's say you're being asked to find 20% of 120. Well, you got to change 20% to 20 over 100, or that would be 2/10 or 1/5. I usually use the lowest terms if I know it, and then multiply. 1/5 times, notice how I took 120 and I wrote it as a fraction, 120 over 1. So I've got 1/5 times 120 over 1. I can just multiply that. 1 times 120 is 120. 5 times 1 is 5. So I get 120 over 5. And if I simplify that, it equals 24. So 20% of 120 is 24. It's just like doing fraction multiplication once you change that percent into a fraction. Make sure you have Now, let's take a look at some examples. The flu hit Roosevelt School hard. 40% of the 480 students were absent at least one day last week. How many students were absent at least one day? Remember that word of means multiply. 40% of 480 means 40% times 480. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to change our 40% into a fraction. We were just working with 40%. 40 over 100, 4/10, 2/5. Okay, so I'm going to use 2/5 times, right, 480 is a fraction, 480 over 1. 2 times 480 is 960, 5 times 1 is 5, so I've got 960 divided by 5, and you get 192. Now, I was able to calculate that in my head, but I understand you might not be able to. It's okay to write a division problem over on the side, and figure it out. So, your answer is 192 students. Now, that's how you figure it out if you are not allowed to use a calculator. But let's talk about if you're allowed to use a calculator. And if you are allowed to use one, hey, by all means, use it. It's really easy. If I'm using a calculator, I could think of the percent as a decimal. 40% would be 0.4, right? Because, well, it would be like 0.40, but I don't really need that. Remember, any percent is per 100 or per hundredth. So, like 73% would be 0.73, 99%, 0.99, 42%, 0.42. Okay, get the drift? So you can easily just punch in your calculator 0.4 or 0.40 times 480, push the enter sign, and you'll get 192. Pretty slick if you're allowed to use a calculator. But you need to make sure you know how to do it both ways. Okay, try this example, and you can use the page right in your notes after you wrote down the steps, okay, and solve this problem. The list price for a toaster is $45. The toaster is sold at a 12% discount. Remember, that would be 12% off the list price. List price means that's how much it's just normally for sale. What are the savings? Okay, so you need to figure out what are the savings if there's a 12% discount. Solve this problem without a calculator, then unpause the video. Okay, now you should have solved the problem without using a calculator. So you took your 12%, wrote it as 12 over 100, multiplied that by your 45 written as a fraction, 45 over 1. 12 times 45 is 540. I know that's not always easy to figure out. Remember, you can break things apart. That might help. For example, if I take 45 and I break it into 40 and 5, 12 times 40, I know 12 times 4 is 48, so 12 times 40 would be 480, and 12 times 5 is 60, so 480 plus 60 is 540. You can also, there's no rule that says you can't do a multiplication problem on the side. Write it out, 12 times 45, okay? I know it's not always easy to figure these things out sometimes, but you're capable of doing it, so don't be lazy about getting out of that work. Alright, so 12 times 45 is 540. 100 times 1 is 100. So you got 540 over 100, or 540 divided by 100. Remember when we're dividing by multiples of 10, really we're like moving the decimal point for each one, so you end up with 5.4, which is $5.40. Now, if you are allowed to use a calculator for this problem, you can just think 12% as a decimal, 0.12 times 45. Your display will show 5.4, and we know that that means $5.40.